Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
Welcome to the Networking RX podcast. I'm your host, Frank Agan, founder and president of AmSpirit Business Connections. Today I have another great guest on. As our ongoing subscribers know, often on this podcast, I'll be sharing ideas, insights, and best practices for building professional relationships and excelling at business networking. Occasionally, however, I will have on subject matter experts, authors, speakers, thought leaders, social scientists. These people share their knowledge and help us have better relationships. Today on the program, I have Jeff Strauss, that's Jeff with a G, otherwise known as Jeff the Writer, and he helps people tell their stories better in order to get better results. Jeff, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Frank. Thanks for having me.
Well, I guess give us a little backstory on you and how you became Jeff the Writer.
Sure. Growing up, I thought my name was always kind of a curse because nobody could say it right, nobody could spell it right. It was always constantly correcting people. But then when I decided to start my freelancing writing business, it was more of a blessing than a curse because so few people have that spelling that I picked up that domain name with no problem whatsoever. So that's how I became Jeff the Writer, just simply because my name at that point was more of a blessing than a curse and the domain was there. As far as beyond that, I've always had a knack for being able to tell stories, to write well, to help people understand ideas that can be somewhat complex and kind of understand, have a good understanding of audience and be able to express ideas and stories in such a way that it's can be digested by whoever the audience happens to be. I've never really had a desire to be a ladder climber in the corporate world. You know, I've had a range of different jobs through my life, but I always knew at some point I was going to have a business of my own. I just kind of didn't know when or what it would be. And then March of 2020, I was about a year out from my 45th birthday, and I decided, if I don't do it now, I might never do it. So I went on to Amazon, bought a book on how to be a freelance writer, took a bunch of notes, and started doing the stuff in the book. I set up my website. I made a business plan. I started going onto the freelancing websites, started building my portfolio, building a portfolio of clients, and just have been on track and scaling since then.
Now, when you were in the corporate world, were you involved in a lot of writing there?
Not per se. I mean, I think every job involves some sort of writing.
Sure.
But not so much the same aspects that I'm doing now.
Right.
Now I'm kind of in the B2B zone where I'm helping other businesses to tell their stories to their clients and to, like you said, to get better results. Right.
No, I totally get it. I don't have a writing background either. I've written a number of books, but I find myself, I've got my own business now, so I pretty much write everything. But I've been on like charitable boards, and everybody's always pointing to me. It's like, oh, you're the wordsmith. You make it sound so good. And I think there are people out there that actually have have actual degrees and really have studied it.
Yes.
But that certainly wasn't me. It doesn't sound like it was you either. Relationships are really about communication. And much of communication in this day and age is the written word. When you work with clients, how are you helping them kind of navigate that? I mean, really one word can change everything. I'll give you a great example, Jeff. I was on a training call today with AmSpirit Business Connections, and somebody chimed in. I was talking about the officers in the organization, and somebody chimed in and said, you know, we have these chapter secretaries. I don't like that. It sounds very demeaning. And in my mind, it's always been something very stately, because in a corporate world, you have a president and you have a secretary of the corporation. Those are the two highest positions in a corporation. You have the Secretary of State, you have the Secretary of Defense, you have Secretary of Treasury. In my mind, I have a whole different perception of, okay, secretary is the one who needs to take notes. No, that's not how I look at it. But that's just one example of two people with entirely different views of the word. I assume you probably run into things like that all the time.
Yeah, and that speaks to having an understanding of your audience and the level of what I want to say, sophistication that they bring to the table. And by understanding your audience, you would better know whether they would view your use of secretary as kind of the traditional assistant to the executive, like you said, taking notes and pouring coffee, versus Secretary of State that's, planning war and all those other things. So, I think it's just, that's the value of having a good writer, or having a skill or a knack for writing, is that you have a better handle on understanding the people you're trying to communicate with, and you can choose your language better.
Okay. When you work with your clients, and I want to get into your business a little later, when you work with your clients, to what extent are you working with them to try and make their written word mimic their spoken word, if that makes sense?
It depends on the project, really. Like if I'm doing copy for a website, it may not so much be a matter of trying to capture their individual voice as a person, but you're trying to capture the voice of the company,
Okay.
the tone of the company. So there's different levels of consideration. If you're writing a speech for someone, of course, you want to try to capture that individual's tone and character, so it sounds like them when it comes out of their mouth. So it just depends on the nature of the project, as to what is the underlying factors that you use to craft the messaging.
Okay. Are there words that are there things that are just like no-go? We don't do this, like self-promotion, stuff like that. I've seen things out there like that. Well, let me put it this way. I know what turns me off, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm a sample size of 1. So I always take that with a grain of salt. Just because it bothers me doesn't mean that it is a bad thing. It just bothers me. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you see certain things out there like, okay, wait a minute, we don't do this. So I'll give you some examples. Like one of my pet peeves. Somebody will send me an email and it would be like, howdy Frank, or hello Frank, whatever. I'm not into the hello or how's it. Just, hey Jeff, comma. But somebody will say, Jeff, I'm Frank Agan. This is what I do. To me, that's just like, okay, that's just a wasted line. I know you're Frank Agan. I can look down at the bottom. It says it at the bottom in your signature line. You don't need to state that up front. So that's one of those things where it's like, why do people do that? And I've coached my own kids from like, you don't need to do that. Start with the point right away. Why are they reading this? And then explain.
No, yeah. In terms of what you just finished saying, I'm a big believer in that also. Always say the most important thing first and assume they're not, because you can't assume they're going to read any further. Then state the next most important thing and the next most important thing on down the line, because you can never assume that they're going to get to the bottom of the page. So you always want to go from most important to least important when structuring a message. As far as what you were talking about earlier, in terms of structure, word choice, tone, these things, if I can, again, it goes back to reading an audience and understanding an audience. If I had an audience full of nuns, I wouldn't necessarily do Andrew Dice Clay humor to warm them up.
Sure.
Yeah. And as far as, like you said, you're not a big fan of the, hey, I'm so-and-so, before just tell me what you want to say. So what I tend to do is I tend to try to mimic whoever has, like if someone reaches out to me, let's say someone reaches out to me on LinkedIn, they send a connection request and say, hi, I'm so-and-so, blah, blah, blah. I'll just assume that that's how they prefer to communicate. So I will try to mimic their style and choices until I get to know them better. And at that point, there may be some changes over time as the relationship changes.
Right.
But I think at the get-go, it's best to get to people on their own territory and then see where it goes from there.
Okay. Well, I assume you need to also gauge who's reading the message. Again, I'm a sample size of one, so what bothers me doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong. It just bothers me. It's like somebody coming out of the blue and getting me on the phone and right away calling me buddy as a way they're, trying to endear themselves to me. That, I realize that's spoken, but that just kind of bothers me. It's like, come on. When you work with your clients, I mean, is there like an interview process that how do you you're trying to speak to their audience, but how do you know what their audience is? How do you know what they're about? Are you looking at things that they're already reading? How does that whole process work?
Sure. I think good storytelling and good messaging comes down to having goals, like anything else in life. If you don't know where you're going, you're never going to get there. So you should have a goal with your writing. You have to know, what do I want this to achieve for me? So that's going to be a lot of what drives how you construct the message. And then also the audience that you're trying to reach. I sometimes use the example of gravity. If you have a room full of scientists, you can do all the math equations and all the physics and everything else, and they'll be happy as pigs in slop. But if you have a room full of common folks, you might just want to pick up a pen off the podium and drop it on the ground and say, there's gravity. So, it's all about kind of having a feel for who you're talking to, how you can format your message so that they'll receive it well, and that they will then, and this goes back to having goals, the content of the message should also kind of drive them to action. You should have a call to action. Because if you don't ask, people aren't going to do it.
Gotcha. Okay. Let's shift gears. Let's talk about your business a little bit. Types of people you're working with. I mean, I obviously don't need names, but types of things you're doing, types of things you're looking to do. You have workshops you do. Masterminds. Is it mainly one-on-one? Just kind of take us on a tour of. I guess not just what you're doing, but what you're aspiring to do, what you're aspiring to pull together.
Sure. When I first started the business back in March of 2020, one of my favorite quotes of all time is Theodore Roosevelt: do what you can with what you have where you are. I love that. It's empowering. And there's always something you can do, because there's always something there that you can use and, be productive. So I kind of took stock. I had my brain, I had my body, and I had an internet connection. So what can I do with that? Well, I could be a freelance writer. So, that's also part of what went into the initial equation of starting the business. And I never, business is all about money. And yes, you have to make money, to be in business. Otherwise, it's just a hobby. But at the same time, I'm not really motivated by the money. I've kind of, I'm not, really in some type of upper echelon, but I've got my basics taken care of. So the motivating factor was, we're kind of into this, the COVID was just starting and people were, working from home and people were quitting their jobs and people were looking for, what can I do, to start a thing of my own. So part of my inspiration for my business was, let me see how far I can push this. And then I can tell that story to inspire other people to say, hey, if you have an internet connection and some ambition, this is what you can do.
Yeah.
So that was a little bit of the mode and the motivation that went into it. As far as people I serve and how I kind of go about things, networking is huge for me. I get a lot of connections and referrals through networking. And LinkedIn is another great source. And LinkedIn, a lot of people will say, well, it's just not working for me. And I would counter that by saying, well, then you're not using it right.
Yeah.
You wouldn't use a screwdriver to hammer a nail in, right? So
Right.
it's a great tool. I've gotten projects, I've gotten business in less than, I just kind of about 4 or 5 months ago, really started getting serious about using LinkedIn as a tool for scaling the business. And I've already gotten projects out of it. So these people that have been doing it for years and years and years and swear that they can't find any business, my response is, you're probably just not doing it right then.
Do you help people with their profiles, writing their profiles, things like that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll tell you, and I find that very interesting. And this kind of goes back to what you were talking about, how people say, hey, Frank, and that kind of grates on you. The thing that grates on me when it comes to LinkedIn profiles is third person. I hate that. I hate it. And it's kind of a professional standard. You're supposed to say so-and-so did this and so-and-so, and you're talking about yourself in the third person. But, an about section is you talking to the people that you want to hire you. And you wouldn't talk about yourself in third person if you were actually talking to the person. So why would you do that in your about section, in your profile? You should be saying I. You should be saying, here's what I've done. Here's what I can do for you. And I see that a lot. That's one of the big things I help people with, is helping them understand, your about section is a conversation you're having with the people you want to hire you. And if you're talking about yourself in the third person, it just doesn't sound right.
You make me want to check my LinkedIn. I don't really know. I might.
Like I said, historically, professionally, third person was a thing to do, but it just seems stilted and unnecessary and ineffective.
Well, I mean, obviously you're making it work. So, doing what you're doing, as you were talking and, people saying, well, I'm not getting things on LinkedIn. My question is, okay, what are you doing? Because being on LinkedIn is not the same thing as being on LinkedIn. I know I've said it exactly the same way, but there's different, what are you doing? Right? Hey, I went to the dance, nothing happened. Well, you went to the dance and you sat in a chair in the corner. Of course, nothing's going to happen. And it's the same thing on LinkedIn. I talk to coaches, I talk to consultants in the networking sense, and I'll tell people there's 7 billion people on this planet. You can't do business with all of them. You don't want to do business with all of them. You need, I don't know how many clients to have a successful life, 700, 7, I don't know, it depends on the business. Right. So the people are out there and they need the help. I'm one of these people, like I've written a lot of books. I don't think I'm a great writer, but I've written a lot, and I feel somewhat empowered with respect to my own writing, but I run into lots of people out there that aren't. And now that doesn't mean every one of them wants to hire somebody. What right. People should do and what they actually do are two separate things. But when you have somebody who recognizes I'm not a strong writer and I'm willing to get the help, I see where you come into the picture to help them with, I guess let me just throw some questions. This is an audio podcast, so help people with cover letters. Yes, no?
I haven't, but I can.
Okay. Well, and you don't need to tell me whether you have or you haven't. Just, hey, I do or I don't.
Okay.
Because nobody's ever going to audit this, right, Jeff? Nobody's going to, Okay, so how about resumes?
No.
Okay, that's not your thing. All right, well, that's good. So we know cover letters, websites. I believe that's a yes. Helping people with email campaigns, structuring how those things sound. I guess, to what degree do you dig in and help people? People have campaigns and they have one email that they change the top line on, or maybe a few things. Sometimes people have campaigns where they might use the same email 5-6 times and then need it for a whole nother email. Are you helping people kind of craft a whole menu of different things?
I have some things that are kind of my go-to tools. I kind of like the idea of a 3 email campaign is kind of, I think, effective. I think your subject line has to be your number one priority, because if the subject line doesn't grab them, the rest doesn't matter because nobody's going to be reading it.
Right.
I think if you send the same message 1, 2, 3, however many multiple times, after the second time, they're not going to read it anymore because, they read it twice and they didn't respond to it. So I'm also a believer in everyone should be different to some extent, because if you say something the first time and it doesn't get the done, what makes you think doing the same thing a second time or a third time or a fourth time is going to be more effective? You got to change that message up. You got to say, hey, maybe you missed the first one, or hey, here's what's changed since the last time we talked, or just something to acknowledge that this is, another piece in the chain, but it's not the same as the one you got last time. Give them something fresh, give them some new value, give them a reason to keep reading.
Okay. So we've already covered LinkedIn profiles, helping people with LinkedIn profiles. Do you actually help people like write posts? Is that something that?
Yeah. Yes, I can do that. I can do it in a couple of different ways. I can you can give me some ideas of what you want to write about, and I can show you how I would structure them for you. And I can even show you, kind of the way that it's what I have found to be an effective way of doing it to this point. Or, I can just take some emails that posts that you've previously written and do some rewriting on those to show you, hey, this was okay, but here's how I might have done it different. And so they can actually see, oh, well, that's how this is different from how I was doing it. So, that can work sometimes. So it just depends what the client wants. Whether they want to learn to do it themselves or they want to pay me to do it for them. That ball is kind of in their court.
Okay. What would be the best way for people to get a hold of you?
LinkedIn, of course. I'm there every day. I post every day. I'm checking my everything, my notifications. I've also got, if you find me there, you can get onto my calendar and set an appointment, and we can meet to talk for 30 minutes about how I can help you. I've also got my website. Those are probably the best ways: LinkedIn, my website, and then actually having a one-on-one Zoom meeting.
And the website is jefftherewriter.com. I'll get that in the show notes. I appreciate your time here today. I am going to leave here, and I'm going to go check my LinkedIn profile, see if I'm writing in the third person or not. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Frank. Thank you. This was great.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AmSpirit.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.